Okay, hi everybody. So we're into ecology. We spent last week talking about populations, and we defined them as individuals of one species living and interacting in an area. We talked about what they study, and we are now ready to move on. We are going to cover this week communities. So let's zoom in here. I'd like to introduce this by introducing the problem of invasive species, and this is one that's local. You can see in this picture here the inlet of Cayuga Lake being pretty much choked off by this invasive plant called hydrilla. And here's a close-up of the plant. When we go out into the floating classroom, Bill Foster, the guy that will facilitate our time there, will talk about the research that they've done trying to detect hydrilla and the methods that they have used to control it. In this map here, it shows all of these purple dots are areas where the water was treated with an herbicide for hydrilla. So people are really worried about this. Invasive species such as zebra mussels, such as the emerald ash borer, purple loosestrife, the goby fish. These have all caused extreme ecological damage as well as had negative economic impacts. So what I would like you to do prior to class, and I want you to come in with something written on this, I'm going to give you credit for this if you do it, is come up with a list of characteristics that you think would make a good invasive species. And I'd also like you to think about what makes an area particularly invasible. Okay, so you have two things to do. And I think that if you think back to the life history stuff and the R versus K selection, that you can apply some of those ideas to this idea of what makes a good invasive species. Okay, so that's for Monday in class. The big question that community ecologists ask is this one: how do species interact? And here you see a jumble of different types of interspecific relationships. Competition, mutualism, herbivory, parasitism, predation, facilitation, commensalism. Some of these are words that you've probably heard, some of them are words that you probably haven't. And so I'd like to take the next few minutes to try to sort of organize these concepts for you. And in doing so, we're going to group them into three main categories. The first is competition. Competition is a lose-lose relationship. The next are exploitative relationships, and these are win-lose relationships. The predator wins, the prey loses, for example. And then the third category, which includes mutualism and commensalism, are called facilitative relationships. So let's go to competition first. The competitive exclusion principle says that no two species can simultaneously occupy identical niches. Now, niches are complex. It's not just what you eat. It's not just where you eat. It's not just how you eat. It's all of those things at the same time. With that in mind, Darwin started us thinking about the outcome of competitive relationships. If both species involved with competition expend energy on the relationship, then there should be very strong selection for the avoidance of competition. Okay, and that can be seen in these two finch species in various ecological scenarios on the Galapagos Islands. You can see if we start from the bottom here, we have a species here. It's just illustrated with these purple bars that has a mean beak depth right around 10. Now this species is allopatric, which means that it lives by itself. It's isolated from this other species on a different that exists on a different island. You can see on this island that the other species in the orange or the peach has a beak size right around in the same range as its sister species. Okay? Now again, these never compete with each other. They're isolated from each other. But when you look at an island, or two islands rather, that have both species on it, in other words, they're interacting with each other, they're competing with each other for resources, they're very closely related birds, you can see that there has been directional selection for larger beaks in one population and directional selection for smaller beaks in the other population. And this concept is called character displacement. It's when competition results in morphological differences that can help with the avoidance of competition. Okay, you can see this in a more a broader way in all of these finch species that have specialized on different types of resources, even though they evolved from a very recent common ancestor on the Ecuadorian mainland. Okay, these were, of course, made famous by Darwin. Now, just like character displacement can change an animal's morphology in a way that helps it sort of specialize on different resources. Animals can change their sort of behavior. This is called resource partitioning. You can see it in the anoles. If you're trunk feeding anole, you are likely not going to compete with a ground feeding or a grass feeding anole. And so these lizards might eat the same types of food, small insects probably, but they don't have to compete with each other because they've evolved different types of spatial specializations. Okay, so that's an introduction to competition. Exploitative relationships are super cool. They are a class of relationships that have a clear winner and a clear loser. And this results loosely in what's called a coevolutionary arms race. So let's talk about predation first. I would like you to take a little bit of time to think about two questions. First, how are predators particularly well adapted for their ecological role? In other words, what makes a good predator? Similarly, how does predation impact, from an evolutionary standpoint, prey? What makes a good prey item? In other words, not what makes it tasty, but what makes it good at avoiding predation. And I'll cover a couple of those things now. We'll come back to this in class. But one sort of adaptation that prey have evolved to avoid predation is called warning coloration, or aposematic coloration. This is a poison dart frog. It's a dendrobatid frog, and it is toxic. And so if you're toxic, you want to be memorable. And so you see this in lots of other types of particularly dangerous animals. And I'll come back to that when I talk about bees and wasps and things like that. But I'm sure you are aware of some of those too, so come prepared to talk. Sort of the opposite of that is seen in this predator, but it's obviously it's a very common adaptation in prey as well, and that's called crypsis, or cryptic coloration, or camouflage. Whether you are a predator or prey, particularly if you're a predator like this tiger that stalks its prey, being camouflage will increase your odds of making a kill. Similarly, if you're a prey item, being camouflage will reduce your visibility to predators, and you're probably all familiar with things like walking sticks and some of these leaf insects that are extremely cryptic. Different types of mammals have cryptic coloration in their fur. I mean, these are examples that I'm sure you're familiar with. One of the coolest sort of sort of evolutionary novelties is called mimicry. And there's two types of mimicry. Batesian mimicry is where the mimic, in this case this caterpillar larva, is relatively benign. It's not dangerous. It is resembling, it's mimicking something that is, in this case, a snake. The monarch and the viceroy butterfly are thought to be Batesian mimics. The monarch, of course, feeds on milkweed as a larva, and milkweed has toxins in it, which makes the adult butterfly toxic to predators. The viceroy, which very closely resembles the monarch, does not feed on milkweed and is not toxic. Okay, so Batesian mimicry is where one sort of benign organism mimics something that's dangerous. Mullerian mimicry is sort of this idea of reinforcing mimicry. And here you can see it in these two different types of hymenopterans. They both very closely resemble each other with the yellow and black stripes on the abdomen, and they are both dangerous. So if you run into a cuckoo bee and you get stung, you are going to avoid the yellow jacket because you associate that danger with that coloration. Similarly, if your first exposure to one of these is a yellow jacket, you're going to avoid contact with the cuckoo bee. So they're kind of both helping each other. Now, just as predators and prey enter into this coevolutionary arms race and have long-term evolutionary impacts on each other, they can have more short-term impacts on each other. We talked about this graph before, but I want to bring your attention to it again. You can see in the green the numerical fluctuations of the snowshoe hare are very closely tracked with the fluctuations of its predator, the lynx. And remember, I talked about this and I termed predator control of prey numbers as sort of what is known as top-down control, and prey or resource-based control of predators is bottom-up control. And if you look back at this graph, you can see that in some areas, like we can see that as the lynx, the predator numbers are rising, shortly after that, the prey numbers begin to fall. When those prey numbers fall, and so that's top-down control, when those prey numbers fall and cause the predators to fall, that would be considered bottom-up control. And so predator-prey fluctuations are often sort of a back and forth between top-down and bottom-up control. Parasitism is another exploitative relationship. There are basically two types of parasites. Ectoparasites live on the surface of the host. They do not live inside the host. So this is a head louse. Here's a better picture of it. If you've ever had these things, you know that they can drive you crazy. They are literally feeding on you, similar to how a predator feeds on a prey. The difference is, of course, is that typically parasites do not cause mortality in their host. Endoparasites live within the host, and so the mosquito is an ectoparasite, of course. It feeds on blood, and she uses this blood to nurture her eggs, basically. But she's got this proboscis that's basically a hypodermic needle for endoparasites. And so you can see here that this is Plasmodium life cycle. Plasmodium is the protozoan that causes malaria. And I don't want you to pay attention to the details of this, but you can see this is an extremely complicated life cycle, an alternation between mosquito hosts and human hosts. these things typically, or they can cause death in the human host, obviously, but the Plasmodium doesn't really care because it's got a mosquito to go to after that. So the complexity of endoparasitic relationships with their host is due to this intimacy. I'm not going to show you this movie now, but I'll come back to it. It's it's a really cool example of how um, parasites can actually change the behavior of their hosts. And so the last exploitative relationship I want to talk about is herbivory. Okay, so the herbivore feeds on the plant, it gets energy from the plant, herbivore wins, plant loses. You can see here that this caterpillar has actually skeletonized this leaf. It left the vascular tissue behind. And this is one of the reasons that the world is still green, is that plants are hard to digest. And so plants will evolve alongside their herbivores to be less and less palatable. And so in this way, plants can sort of avoid extreme herbivory. And this is a question that I want to come back to in class, and maybe you can think about it beforehand. Is, in spite of all of the insect herbivores and all the other types of herbivores for that reason, if you look out the window in the middle of the summer, not right now, but in the middle of the summer, you see green. The plants don't seem to be suffering too bad at the hands of herbivores. And I would just like to sort of remind you that just like there's this coevolutionary arms race between predator and prey and parasite and host, there's a similar arms race between herbivore and plant. And so I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about the types of adaptations that plants have to avoid herbivory. I think that's all the time we have for this particular video. We'll probably end up covering facilitative relationships in class, along with other things like diversity and disturbance and things like that. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction to some of these community interactions that you're probably already a little bit familiar with. So come prepared for a discussion of these during class. I'm not going to lecture on this anymore. And remember, this video, actually, I ask you in this video to come prepared with a couple pieces of homework. Okay, see ya.